Ever feel like the resources and advice out there for women are missing something essential? I thought so too, which is why more than 6 years ago, I created She Said, She Said. I'm Laura Cox Kaplan, and after 3 decades in communications and then advocacy and now juggling motherhood and entrepreneurship, trust me, friend, I get it. Making a real impact takes more than just passion. It takes the right mindset, the right skills, the right investments, and the right community. On this show, we dive deep with incredible women from all walks of life who have been there. We uncover the secrets to building influence, navigating tricky relationships, and staying true to ourselves even when it's tough. And let's face it, it often is. I also throw in my own favorite productivity and life hacks, things that have shifted my perspective and might help you too. Wherever you are in your journey, my goal here is to leave you inspired to define success your way and to help you build the confidence you need to tackle your biggest goals. Subscribe today and let's unlock your full potential, your confidence, and your greatest influence. Welcome back to She Said, She Said podcast. Have you ever wondered how your past experiences can unlock unexpected career paths? Well, today we're diving deep into the power of transferable skills, those amazing abilities that you gain that can translate across jobs and across industries and across sectors. But it's not just about using the same skill in a new role necessarily. It's actually about recognizing how your own unique blend of talents, honed by your experiences, can be valuable to other organizations or to other enterprises in new and surprising ways. This is how we can open up a whole world of possibilities and make ourselves truly stand out. But here's the twist. Sometimes our transferable skills come with hidden baggage, maybe unhelpful mindsets that we might be carrying along. Now, that was true of this week's guest, Erin Wade. Erin's journey is truly fascinating. She is a labor and employment lawyer turned mac and cheese entrepreneur and millionaire. Yes, really. We'll explore Erin's fascinating career pivot and also the mindset shifts that she had to make in order to thrive as the founder of Homeroom. And Homeroom is her wildly successful mac and cheese restaurant. Erin didn't just bring her legal expertise to the table. Obviously, she did. But she also had to rewire her thinking to ditch lawyerly risk aversion and to really and truly fully embrace the world of entrepreneurship. We'll discover in this conversation how Erin traded an adversarial mindset for collaboration, and then how she built a really unique workplace culture with innovative solutions like her color code of conduct system. That system is so effective that it is now a best practice that's been adopted by the EEOC, and it's used by organizations all over the world. Erin has also written a terrific book. It's called Mac and Cheese Millionaire, Building a Better Business by Thinking Outside the Box. I absolutely love the title. I've included a link in the show notes where you can purchase the book for yourself. For now, though, here is episode 306 with the fantastic Erin Wade. Enjoy. Erin, welcome to She Said, She Said.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm really happy to have you. I absolutely love your story and this dimension of taking skills that you used as a labor and employment lawyer and deploying them in such a different way. I got so much inspiration from the story. So maybe to catch my listeners up a bit, bring us up to speed on kind of how you got to this point.
Sure. So I had a huge career pivot from being a corporate attorney to opening a wildly popular macaroni and cheese restaurant. And we went on to do some really cool things in terms of changing sort of the landscape of hospitality and how women are treated there, as well as selling, many millions of dollars of cheesy carbohydrates. But Yeah, so I wrote a book about it called The Mac and Cheese Millionaire, and that's what brings me here today.
Yeah, okay, let's dig into your story a bit more. So you're working as a labor and employment lawyer. At what point did you decide, okay, mac and cheese is the way to go? Like, how did this pivot happen? When did you decide that law was not working for you, and sort of what were the next steps that you took?
Sure. Well, I had the idea specifically for a mac and cheese restaurant. Coming home from work one night, I was really miserable and just craving some good comfort food. I really wanted a bowl of mac and cheese. And I realized, I live in Oakland, California, which is a major city, and that there was no place, no restaurant I could go that had very good mac and cheese, where that was sort of the centerpiece of the menu. And I thought, oh, that's so odd. There's pizza places and burger places. There's no mac and cheese place. And I proceeded to make a recipe I'd grown up eating. It's my dad's recipe, and it's just the best version that I've ever had. And it was so comforting and tasted so good. And I was like, it's bonkers that there is no place that has this. I think it should exist, and I should be the person to open it. That was sort of the light bulb moment. But it took many months after that. It wasn't until I was fired from my job as being a lawyer that I was like, oh, maybe that wacky idea I had, I should actually go for it.
How did you get started, though? I mean, to go from law to entrepreneurship and becoming a restaurateur is like, I mean, there's very different skill sets. There's a lot involved in opening a restaurant that I'm sure most lawyers wouldn't necessarily know. Sort of, what do we do first? Maybe talk a little bit about the process that you went through to get there.
Sure. So, it does seem like a radical departure, which it was, don't get me wrong. But I had actually been really, really interested in food and cooking for a long time. And I had spent years working in restaurants, and I actually just saw no future there for myself. I was earning minimum wage. I was working really long hours. It was really crappy conditions. And I was like, this is bonkers. What am I doing here? Which is how I became a lawyer in the first place. So I had experience in restaurants. I wasn't totally, operating totally blind, but I had never obviously owned one. I had never held a leadership position of any sort in any job that I had had. And all of a sudden I was, an owner, a manager, running a team of people. So that was a pretty radical departure. And the truth is, I really didn't know what I was doing. And the book is really about the decade of sort of that I spent, trying and somewhat hilariously failing my way upwards to figuring out how to be good at that, because it's not something that we're taught. And I didn't have a lot of great examples of what it means to be a great place to work, a great boss. And I really wanted to be that for other people, since it was not something I had experienced myself.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the things that were particularly unique in creating this culture. And you have a term that you talk about in the book, culture over concept, or culture beats concept every time, or something along those lines. Talk about how you arrived at some of these very unique strategies for not only managing employees, but for, building a really collaborative culture.
Yeah. So, a story that I tell in the book that I think really encapsulates this, better than anything else, actually a sports analogy. Like I spent a long time trying to figure out, what was wrong with places that I had worked. What did I want to create in this, place that I was now in charge of? And the best way I know how to describe it is by talking about surfing. So bear with me for a minute, but we'll get there. I promise this will come full circle and make sense. So I'm a big surfer, which, much like business, is a very male-dominated sport. And the rules, for those that don't know it, are it's very winner take all. So if a wave comes, lots of people are going to go for it. But the first person who gets on it, it's all theirs. They don't share it. And so it makes it very cutthroat, very competitive, very winner take all. And, nothing wrong with that necessarily. But this one day I went in the water, and it was a group of entirely women, actually, none of whom even knew each other. But I had this really different experience where, without anyone even saying anything, it became instead of an individual sport, a team sport. Everyone started communicating, started taking turns, started sharing waves, started cheering each other on. And I think when I look at my years in business, I'm like, oh, that was a big aha moment for me where I was like, wow, I think this is actually really the competitive advantage that women such as myself bring to the workplace. It is this focus on collaboration over competition, on communication, on, sharing success. And like, those are really the values that I tried to cultivate.
Interesting. That is so fascinating. And I love the analogy with surfing as well. That's so interesting. So, in developing a team, in developing this culture, I know you had some really interesting approaches, things like something called the stoke out rule. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So, I think something I was trying to figure out is, a lot of places why they're not fun to work is that there's just no opportunity to really be yourself, right? It's very hierarchical, very top down. There's not a lot of room for your individuality or creativity. So I initially reacted to that with like very little rules and structure, but it turns out that that's its own like total dystopia. It's not fun to work somewhere that doesn't have rules or guidance. And so somewhere that I sort of settled, I liken it to a coloring book, right? Which is where if you hand someone a blank sheet of paper, which is like handing them something with no rules, you're going to end up with like different pictures from everyone. If you give people a paint by number, it's always going to look the same. But a coloring book, you're going to know what you're looking like. Yeah, looking at everyone's coloring in a rose or whatever it is, but the colors that they choose are going to be quite different. So that was really the sort of leadership philosophy I was looking for. Like, what are sort of the right boundaries within which people get to express their own individuality and freedom? So the stoke out rule is a great practical example of this. Like, I was trying to figure out, how do we have great service? Like, and a lot of restaurants, it is very much that paint by number. They tell you exactly what you need to say, like, hi, I'm so-and-so, welcome to whatever this place is. Would you like fries with that? We've all been there, and it's not fun as an employee or as a guest, frankly. But then there's places where you go in and you like never know what you're going to get, is someone going to be nice to you? Or are they going to be cranky? Are they going to explain the menu to you? So, we settled on this thing. I noticed that there was one server who was really exceptional at his job. And I was like, hey, is there any guiding principle that you use? And he was like, oh, yeah, he's like, I know that our mission is to be the best part of people's day. And I try my best to give that to everyone, but we serve, thousands of people a week. So he's like, but what I know I can do is once an hour or like 5 times a shift, I pick a table at total random that I am just going to completely stoke out. So I am going to make this like the best dining experience of their year. And I'm just going to do whatever it takes just for them that's going to make it super special. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. So we started, adopting his sort of stoke out rule and just telling servers, hey, you can do this however you want. You can, whatever, like sing people a song, draw them a picture. Like we don't, send them a free dessert, whatever it is. Use your own mind and creativity, but we expect you to stoke out 5 tables a shift, if nothing else. And it's so fun because they would do wildly different things I never could have imagined that if
like give me an example. Yeah.
One of my favorite stories is there was, if you talk to people, you'll usually find out a bit about why they're there. So there was this gentleman who was there with his parents, and it turns out his wife had just had a baby and we were near a hospital. And so they were coming in to eat food and bring some back to her in the hospital. And we're like, oh my God, what an amazing opportunity. So ended up, putting together this like really special care package for his wife who was in the hospital. And we included like a homeroom onesie for the baby and then like a little gift certificate so that the baby's first mac and cheese could be at homeroom. And, like just this whole care package for this new family, which, was such a magical experience. I highly doubt that they've ever had anything like that happen to them before or since. So, I think just moments like that are what makes work fun and what makes it, meaningful to, I mean, frankly, just to be alive.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I know you also took an interesting approach to something that you refer to as restorative justice in terms of, when a problem happens, you had a fairly innovative way of dealing with that. Maybe talk a little bit about what that looked like and maybe how you came up with that concept.
Sure. So, I'll be honest, I wish that my legal career was more helpful at more parts of being an entrepreneur. I often feel like it was actually a mindset to overcome rather than a benefit to to what
Interesting.
I accomplished. But an area where it was really helpful is something that had always been really off-putting to me, not just in workplaces, but in life, is the way we handle misbehavior, right? Whether it's your parents punishing you or school sending you to detention, or an employer, giving you a write-up. It's very much you do something wrong, you get a punishment. And I was like, this does not feel like an effective deterrent. And it certainly wasn't for me now that I all of a sudden was in charge of, like dozens of people who are working for me. Um, so yeah, I started thinking and looking at other possibilities. And from the law, there is a system called restorative justice, where instead of punishment, like, sending someone to prison for doing something wrong, there's a goal to make it right. So they actually meet with victims' families. There's like a dialogue, usually like an apology, something meaningful done to that community that they've now hurt, things like that. So I was like, what if we tried using this in a work context? And we did. And it was so great because, it just encouraged. So like, instead of punishing people, we would just sit down for a conversation and go through the restorative justice questions, which are, what happened? Who was impacted? How can you make it right for them? And, people would have to be more accountable for their behavior. It's not like, whatever, I got a write up or I lost a shift.
Right.
It's, they would actually have to think like, who did I hurt and what can I do to improve this for them? Because that's, and when you're part of something bigger than yourself, I think that's what makes, again, work worth coming to, whether it's that stoke out rule for customers or how you treat your fellow employees. It's feeling accountable to something more important than just you.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I want you to go back to something, if you don't mind, that you said just a second ago about, we sort of opened this conversation talking about transferable skills, but you said, this was one of this example that you just gave was something that you did pull from your legal career,
Yeah.
but your legal career also meant you had to really shift your mindset. I'd love for you to dig into that and maybe give listeners some advice for how do you break out or challenge those patterns of sort of learned thinking in a particular career in order to get the value and deploy it very differently for some other pursuit or some other career.
Yeah. I mean, I think, something I'd never thought about when I was personally sort of looking at careers and sizing them up when I was younger is, what is the worldview? Like what is the belief system that underlies this thing that I do? And, so as a lawyer, it's an adversarial system in America, at least. So, two sides take the most extreme position possible. You're required to be like the most zealous advocate for your side. And then they fight it out so that someone can win. And
Yeah.
it's a very destructive process, right? Because, to be honest, in most of the cases I worked on, it amounted to nothing more than like blackmail. Like, we're just going to make this like really expensive for the other side, and eventually someone's going to give up. I found that really, really demoralizing. And you're also looking at the world through a lens of risk assessment and, what could create what outcome. It's just a very defensive way to think about life and very like aggressive and adversarial. And, I think something I really love about business that I hadn't contemplated before is that it's naturally creative, right? You cannot make stuff by yourself. You have to be engaging other people. You have to be drawing them in with a vision of what you're trying to do. You have to collaborate with them to make anything of value. You can't be like destructive and fighting with people all the time. Or you can, but then you'll only be successful in spite of yourself, not because that's how you're behaving, right? And so I think that really spoke to me. And so I had to let go of, the way that I was used to operating and start practicing a different way. But honestly, that way was just much more naturally in keeping with who I am and how I wanted to be in the world. And I think like anything, you just get that experience with practice and diving in and trying something new, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the good news is it did make me value it so much more. I think had I become an entrepreneur without having been a lawyer, I think on really hard days, I wouldn't know to value it in the same way that I did. But I was like, you know what? I know what it's like to work in an office. I know what it's like to do this other thing that on the outside looks really sexy, but on the inside is really unpleasant, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it helped give me no regrets. I think that's one of the gifts I did get.
Yeah. Was it hard for you to kind of redefine success for yourself, that you had sort of one lens that you were operating with when you were a lawyer, and you had to kind of shift that? Was that difficult? And how did you sort of go about creating that new definition of success for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of us are dished up sort of the same definition of success, which is, get a
Money.
high paying job that, looks good on paper, where you're, sort of have a respectable title and you can buy a nice house. And, I mean, and I had lived that life and it was deeply unsatisfying. So yes, I had to think, what is meaningful? What would be meaningful? And I honestly didn't know. I mean, I was concerned, to be honest, when I started Homeroom, that when I would hear people say that they were excited to wake up for work in the morning, I was like, maybe it's just not me. Like, maybe I'm just not this kind of a person, you know?
Right.
But opening the restaurant, I was like, if I can't make this for myself, then it's just not possible, right? And so I'm glad I did, because I did figure it out and really redefine success as, really meaningful connections with other people, building something bigger than you are. And creating a system of collective success for those in your, sort of orbit and community.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things that I was so fascinated by that you created at Homeroom was a color-coded system for dealing with harassment issues when a customer comes in and is giving an employee a difficult time. And this system that you developed has now been adopted by the EEOC and other companies. Walk us through what that looks like and how you came up with that idea.
Sure. So, over the years, we developed a lot of really cool systems to be communicative and collaborative in like very real ways, not just where these are like values on a piece of paper somewhere. And I do talk about them a lot in the book. But so, yeah, I had, as a result of them, a lot of servers came to me one day and were like, hey, we are experiencing harassment from customers and we want to try to fix it. And I was really shocked. I mean, it's embarrassing, but I really had no idea this was going on. And we ended up, trying to figure it out together and tried a number of things that didn't work, but then landed on something that did. And it was so effective. I'm happy to talk about what it is, but
yeah, please.
I ended up writing a, op-ed in the Washington Post about it that went very viral. I was asked to testify about it in front of the EEOC, and they adopted it as best practice nationally. It's currently used by restaurants and bars around the world. So, it's just a wild success, but I think it's a real example of how, you can be one small business, one small thing, but if you really engage people, you can solve problems that can have a global impact. We just have like people being vastly, I think, underutilized in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Talk us through what the system was. This is and sort of what you mean by harassment. Give us sort of an example for someone who's not as familiar with, maybe running a restaurant and the kinds of challenges that employees would have in that setting.
Oh, sure. It's funny because we're a very family-friendly restaurant. This is not like some kind of raucous, like
Right.
bar or something like that. But, still people are being harassed. So the situation that gave rise to this whole conversation is there was a server who's actually serving a family of like 4 or 5. And the father like put his hand up her shirt as she was like leaning over to get stuff off the table and like
Oh my
touched her
God.
stomach. And it was super creepy and gross. And I think that was pretty egregious, but things like that were happening, all the time. And, when you look at statistics in restaurants, it's like the rate of people who experience harassment, it's obscene. It's far more R than R not. So,
wow.
So we came up with this system we call the color code of conduct, and it has 3 different colors, yellow, orange, and red. And each color, there's just a way of understanding a certain behavior that a customer might have, and then an action that a manager needs to take. So In the case of the yellow, it's nothing more than you just get a bad vibe from the table. So like nothing's happened. You just get a creeped out feeling. So if in that case, you go to a manager, if you're a staff member, and say, hey, I've got a yellow at table 2. And it's the staff member's choice. Does the manager take over the table, or are they just sort of alerting them, hey, I just want you to keep your eye on them, right? An orange is like an ambiguous statement plus a creepy vibe. So let's say that same person sort of creeped you out is like, hey, I like your shirt. There's nothing on its face like wrong with that. But, if it's like a little kid that says it to you, you're going to be super flattered. If it's someone who's been leering at you, you're going to be like, oh God, like I didn't want that. Right. So, in that case, you would just say, I have an orange at table 2. You don't need to explain what happened. You don't need to justify it. Just the manager is required to take over the table. And then in the case of a red is an like overtly sexual comment. So something like, you look sexy in that shirt, or touching, like in the case of that creepy dad.
That would be a hard red.
Yes, exactly.
flashing red.
Yeah. And in that case, the manager is required to take over the table and the person is just asked to leave. So, and what's cool about it is that we invented it just as a way to deal with harassment in a way that didn't require people to justify what had happened or explain it or make it, because different things sound threatening to, different people. And that was a problem we were running into as some managers were like, oh, it's not a big deal. They're like, this is a big deal to me, right?
Yeah.
So we thought it was just going to help us give us a way to deal with harassment, but it actually did is it really, really like significantly reduced what was happening because, once no one walks into a restaurant and just sticks their hand up someone's shirt. I mean, I don't want to say no one, but it's pretty rare. What that person is going to do is they're going to sort of check that person out. They're going to start in the yellow territory and they're going to escalate into orange. They're going to maybe like lob some like low level comments and see if that person does anything. And then they're going to get more aggressive. And so what happened is by changing the power dynamic at these lower levels, we just stopped seeing these red cases happening very much at all. So this is pretty amazing. And that's, why it became so virally popular because it's just really easy to use. It's very respectful of, wherever people are at. Customers don't even, unless they're getting kicked out, don't even know it's being used on them.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's easy to use. It's really helpful and it makes a giant difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a smart, thoughtful, but actually really simple approach to something that, I'm sure plagues a lot of businesses, not just restaurants for sure. I know that it's also, you cite that as evidence for your retention of employees. Turnover rates in restaurants it's exceptionally high. Maybe talk a little bit about that for a moment.
Yeah. So the average tenure of a restaurant employee in the United States is like less than 90 days. It's pretty abysmal. Our average was 2.5 years, and our financial performance was in the top 1% of restaurants nationwide. So, these aren't just like fun, cute ideas, even though they are fun and cute as well. But I think they're also, they're really the key to something more meaningful and, how you can retain people, make more money, and frankly, in ways that don't cost you anything. It's just you have to care more,
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk. We've been talking about elements that you talk about in the book. Maybe share why you decided to write the book and what you hope folks will take away from it.
Yeah. So, I, after, a decade of running the restaurant, I had been approached many, many, many times to sell and ended up selling the company in 2020 to a much larger restaurant group. And, part of why I made the decision to do it is I had never like personally had wanted to be like, oh, I have one successful restaurant. Let me open 100. Like that's some people's joy. I think replicating the same thing over and over and over was not my joy. And my joy was really creating the best possible place for people to work, having the most, like the broadest possible impact on our community. And I had really, I thought, figured out how to do that in a fairly compelling way. And those were the ideas that I wanted to scale, not the macaroni and cheese concepts, So I wrote the book because I wanted to bring these ideas into other businesses, but also I just wanted to inspire other people, particularly women, to, feel more comfortable following their passion. Honestly, just to enjoy a good read. I feel like the business genre is generally pretty boring. Like this book is fun. It's funny. One of the things I'm hearing like the most often from random people who pick it up is like, this is so fun and funny. Like I was not guessing that was going to be true of a business book, but it should be, because these are just like, it's just.
And they're great stories. You have great stories in the book.
Yeah, totally. So I think I just wanted to like entertain people first and foremost, but then inspire them and give them a better way of, whether it's building your career or your company, give them some ideas of how to do that.
Yeah. Erin, talk about what's next. How will you take all of the skills that you learned as a lawyer or unlearned, and the skills that you learned as a restaurateur and an entrepreneur and now an author? What's next for you?
Yeah, it's doing everything possible, like I said, to sort of, broaden the impact of those ideas. So I teach about them, I speak about them, I'm writing about them, I consult about them, I sit on boards, there's like a lot of different hats I can wear that I think help sort of spread this message and its impact. So I enjoy wearing them all.
Yeah. Do you have a particular way of defining what you're doing? Do you call that a portfolio career, or do you refer to yourself as a multi-hyphenate? I'm sort of fascinated by this. I had Fran Hauser on the podcast last week, and that was one of the topics we talked about was how you create like the verbiage, the way that you refer to yourself once you're not a lawyer or, maybe you're an entrepreneur, but you're doing all these other things at the same time. Do you have a term that you use to describe what you do?
It's funny. I mean, I do. I think I say like I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an author. I want something more compact and singular. So yes, I'd love for someone to invent the term that was, because I feel like I'm like giving people a mouthful when I talk about what I do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So Erin, where can folks find you?
Sure. I mean, you can get the book anywhere books are sold. It's called The Mac and Cheese Millionaire. And you can find me on my website, erinwade.co, or on social media at the Erin Wade.
Amazing. I will include a link where folks can get the book in the show notes for this episode as well. Erin, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Erin's story is such a great reminder that our skills and experiences are interconnected in ways that we might not always realize. So I'm curious, friend, what are some seemingly unrelated experiences in your life or career that might be holding the key to your next big opportunity or pivot? If you haven't thought about it, you might be surprised by what you discover, and I would love to hear. So head on over to Instagram and let me know. You'll find me at Laura Cox Kaplan. In the meantime, have a great rest of your week. And remember, She Said podcast is a weekly production of She Said Media.